We're using cover crops to help improve soil health. It's an old practice that's kind of brought back into new light again, and it's keeping the soil covered, keeping a living root growing 24/7 and 365 days of the year as much as possible. It prevents soil erosion in the heavy rains and in the wintertime, and it's collecting carbon or sunlight all year long, which the microorganisms under the soil benefit from. The typical cover crop rotation, after we harvest our wheat, we plant a 5-way cover crop mix: radish, triticale, crimson clover, oats, and some vetch. After a week it's up and it's starting to take growth, and we leave it all the way through the winter until the spring, when we go to plant our next commodity crop. That's evolved to intercropping, so that the practice of going into our corn that has been already planted and is about 2 or 3 weeks out of the ground, and we'll go in and plant a cover crop, so that when the corn is harvested in the fall, the cover crop is already established and growing up. We've developed our own side dress applicator that helps us to plant that crop, as well as providing the nutrients for the corn at the same time. If you go on social media, there's a big network of farmers all around that have done this kind of practice, dabbled in that little bit of practice, but it all comes together and bouncing ideas off each other. If you want that to work on your farm, try a little bit, try a couple acres. You're gonna have your fails, but you gotta fail small and keep building off that, I guess.
Environmental stewardship is very important to me. I live here. I want to be able to breathe the air. I want the land to be able to produce crops. And I want those crops to continue to be nutritious for whatever their end use is, whether it's feeding cattle or whether it's feeding people. I want to make sure that my costs of production are as minimal as possible. And the best way to do that is to make sure that the ecosystem around those crops is healthy. There's a lot of things that are done on farms that benefit everybody, whether it's keeping waterways clean, that's sequestering carbon, that's providing biodiversity. All these things are happening on farms right now, but they're not being recognized, and yet we're penalized when we don't provide them. So if we can show how we're doing it and where we're doing it and give them some actual hard numbers, then we can figure out how much value is actually there to the public at large. We're actually doing some tests in the next year or so on the carbon sequestration of land that's been grazed. And we're comparing that through different grazing mechanisms. We're comparing that to cash crop areas and how things have been done traditionally in general. What I hope we'll be able to show is the carbon capture through this mechanism is worthwhile. I'm set up to do once-a-day moves. There are farmers out there who are doing 2 and 3 moves a day. And obviously the more moves you can do, the better it is for your soil. We're starting to use a little bit more in terms of grass finishing, so we can hit different markets, but also because grass finishing might be an opportunity down the road to market carbon credits, etc. We really want to build up the soil here. And this soil was actually in pretty good shape before I got here. I want to make sure it stays in good shape. This land is very, very heavy and it's very rolly. So it's not necessarily the best land for growing the traditional corn, soybeans, and wheat on a regular rotation. What it is very good at growing is forages. So we can grow grasses, we can grow sorghum, we can grow pasture. We can do that fairly easily. If we integrate a little bit of the cash crop in there as well, that offers us the opportunity to put some cover crops in that we can graze. What we're doing is right for what this farm is built for.
We've stepped back to a point from the farming side, but we still are very involved with soil health and plant health on the farm. We work with the young man that runs our farm now, and I work with him to look at reducing tillage, doing more no-till. The other innovation now that I will entail more myself is to work in the woodlots and in our fragile lands to bring those back and to bring habitat for our pollinator species and for other wildlife. And these projects we're doing now do help society as a whole. We've had some of the fragile lands, the creek flats, which are highly erodible. And as farmers put in more drainage tile on their farms, and I'm a farmer, I put in more drainage tile too. The creeks get the water that much faster. There's times we'd plant 8 acres and harvest 6, and dirt's moving. You go back in the springtime, have to fill in ruts and rills all through the fields and through the low flat. So we went through and put in prairie grass and duck ponds, signed agreements, and out through the Alternate Land Use Stewardship Program, ALICE. And the Weston Foundation helps to fund that. With that, we've gone back in and put in soybeans for 1 year, around a pretty soybean to clean up the weeds, and then walk back in to plant your prairie grass and flowers. And we have Ducks Unlimited come in to put in the duck ponds. We would pay up front for these projects and then reimburse money later on. So in the end, I had no money out of pocket, but I did have time and labor and ongoing. I do not have income from that land. Now as a farmer, some years I make good money off the creek flats. It is quite fertile. Other years I lose money because of the flooding. So we had to take a step back. What's the best use for this property? Long term, can I make some other money off that? And how can I hold the land in place? And when the water does flood now with the prairie grasses, it will grab nutrients, it'll grab dirt. It'll help hold water in place so it can filter out slower later on. As we get more fragmented with our woodlots and with our wildlife areas, nature as a whole does not have the same abundance that it had years ago. When we do need, and they're showing that as we watch the honeybees falling in numbers, different birds, different insects, different bugs going down, we may not care at times that we're helping, but overall, the health of the planet is important, the health of my community is important, the health of the people in my municipality are important. What can we do overall to help that out? That's what the benefit is to keep the wildlife, to keep the insects and birds a place to go, and to keep the overall environment healthy. If the environment's healthy, we're going to be healthy.
Farming has to be sustainable and it has to be resilient. This farm here has been passed down 4 generations now, and being sustainable means being around for 4 generations. And we treat the soil as a commodity, essentially. The soil has to be there for a long time.
Generations before us were able to work closely with the environment because that's what they had. They didn't have ways to overpower the environment. As we see longer droughts, as we see bigger rainfall events, and as we see more clustering of weather, that's going to force us to work with the environment more and more and figure out ways that we can address what's being thrown at us. We have to figure out how we can work together with nature, because it's a lot easier to work with nature than it is against it. You just have to figure out how to read it.